Bun găsit, dragi prieteni ai revistei Psihologii! Suntem în căutarea stării de bine și astăzi vom discuta despre performanța în sport, dacă este un sacrificiu sau nu pentru copilărie, și vom fi alături de Brian Jorgensen. Welcome, Brian. I'm very glad that we can talk about this subject today, and I know that you are a former MXGP winner. And I'm very curious about what is the story behind and what takes to become a champion.
Yes. Well, it's a lot of things. I think one of the things that made me becoming who I was and who I am today is definitely the will to succeed and finding something in your life that is interested enough that you want to sacrifice everything to get there.
When did you start motocross?
Well, I started very slowly when I was about 4 years old. I actually got introduced to the sport via my brother, which was 3.5 years older than me, and I was actually begging my dad to be able to try that bike. So my first, you can say, meeting with the motocross bike was in the backyard of our house, and that created my first little injury here on my right eye because I kind of flipped the bike and I got the brake lever down in my eye and almost lost my right eye. So that was the first meeting with the bicycle, with the motocross bike. But I really loved it. After that, my mom was not too proud about it.
So that incident didn't scare you?
No, not at all, because I've actually been asked my dad since I was probably 2.5 when I could start bicycling, and I was actually asking him all the time, can I not try the bike? Can I not try the bike? And then he said, no, it's not possible. It's not possible. Your mom don't want you to ride a motorcycle because you're so clumsy. And I was always falling over, everything in the garden, and then I finally convinced him one day when my mother was out shopping, and he let me try the bike, and we ended up on a hospital. So I guess my mom was not too proud about the situation, but it never scared me. It actually just confirmed me that even more that I wanted to ride a motorcycle, and that at that time, I didn't know, of course, how good I could be in the sport. I didn't know a lot about the sport, but slowly it took very high speed with everything. And some years after, already when I was like 10 years old or 11 years old, I started racing and became Danish champion quite close after that I started doing races.
So between 5 years old and 10 years old, what did you do? Did you train? Did you take it seriously?
No, to be honest with you, at that time, we are talking quite a few years ago. So it was back in the, about 79 or 80s, and at that time we were not allowed to race and to have a license that kept you insured until we were 10 years old. So basically we were just riding on fields wherever we could have the possibility, and we did some riding at race horses, when they were racing on a kind of a speedway with horses, and we were actually just racing there and until I was 10 years old, and then I got my license. I remember about the 20th of March 1985, and I started racing in April and won my first race straight away, and you had to collect points, and then I became a senior, you can say, the best. There was a CE class and a B class, and I became a licensed rider, and that means the year after I already started doing Danish championship, and I won my Danish championship already 1 year after that I started racing. So Until I was from, let's say, from 4 to 10, I would say it was a lot of just fun and, playing around. And I think that's one of the keys to be able to be successful is, of course, you need to understand when you do World Championship that you have to take it very seriously, but also to keep the fun involved with the sport is very important to be able to grow.
And how your father react? Did he push you a lot? How was he reacting while you were having fun with the motorbike?
No, I actually had an amazing childhood, I would say. Now when I look back and have my own son and train and help other people, I get even more impressed of how my dad reacted and how he took the whole thing, because he always just let me have fun. The motivation to go and ride and to spend as much time on the tracks as possible was always my own. My dad have never interfered anything when it comes to racing. He always said to me, just go out and have some fun. And if I became first or I became last, I think the only thing that he would like to see was me having fun and also doing my best that he know that I was capable of. But if I didn't do my best and I was just fooling around, whatever that could have been, I think it's never been the case, because I had a mentality when I was really young. I wanted to win everything what I did in life. I wanted to win, and it was really difficult for me to lose. But I think the most important is that the will to succeed and the will to be able to go riding and doing races was always just coming from myself and my own motivation to want to be the best as what I could in any stage.
So in order to become a champion, you have to have a lot of fun, to have determination, to have this big desire to win. Your self-motivation, is there anything more that helped you in order to become a champion?
Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of things. I think, like you said, one of the things is, first of all, finding a sport in your life that you will find it so interesting, because when you have interest of something that you do in life, you also have the motivation. And then when you start setting goals and you have, of course, to be able to set realistic goals. If you're already at 10 years old, you're thinking to become a world champion, but you doesn't know at that point what it takes, then it can be a very, very long goal ahead. So what I did in my career was that setting myself realistic goals that I knew I could reach with being dedicated and willing to sacrifice something. I hear always a lot of people asking me, especially now as a dad and as a coach helping other people, if they think that I sacrifice a lot to become to the stage I was in the World Championship, being 17 times on a podium, winning races and being top 4 in the highest class of the sport. But my answer is always that I actually never sacrificed something. I think I was very realistic about goals and how I should achieve them. And I took, my first goal was to become a Danish champion. So when I became Danish champion in 85 cc, which is the small bikes, I wanted to become a Danish champion the year after to move up to what we call bigger wheels, 85 with a little bit bigger wheels. And then I wanted to become a 125 Danish champion. And when I reached that, I wanted to go out and see of my capability of doing international races. And that's where I started doing European Championship. And when I was about 18 or 19, I became European champion. And then it was, of course, natural for me to build on the next step to wanted to become a world champion. And that's where I kind of set my goals and also the bar really high, because to become one of the best in Europe is already a difficult part. But becoming a world champion, there's a very few that will ever achieve that in their life. So I think it's about, finding the interest, having fun, even if there's a lot of pressure when you become a factory rider, because people pay you to ride, people expect you to win. There's a lot of staff and a lot of money behind it. And I think mostly just, wanted and willing to sacrifice something and understand that this is going to be, motocross is one of the hardest sport in the world physically, but also mentally. So I think it's a very much of a learning process of yourself understanding how you gain confidence is to work really hard. I mean, I work 4 to 6 hours every day for 360 days a year. And I can only do that and put so much work in because I love what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. And so, when you were a child, when you were like 11 years old, how was your agenda? You said you were training a lot, but what did you do with school and other things?
I mean, at that point, I was still going to school like normal kids. The only difference will be that when I came home, I would either train or I will work on my bike, or I will wait till my dad come home and then he will take me for practicing. So you can say that I was a normal kid when I was in school. I tried to do as much schoolwork as possible because I know that was important at that time when I didn't probably realize. I wouldn't say I had a plan that time to become a professional. I think that it was something that came later because I find out that I was thinking, hang on a minute, I can actually be pretty good at this. So maybe I could make my hobby into my living. And that's where I start taking things a lot more seriously. So I was a normal kid like anybody else. I did my homework like I should do. It was not a massive interest for me, but I did it because I knew that was important. And then I was just a little bit different when it came to racing, because the mindset that you need to be able to have when you want to be the best is to try to focus just on yourself and be a little bit, how can I say, arrogant and when you sit behind the gate, you cannot be the nice guy. You have to believe in yourself and want it so much that I always said to myself when I was training, I said you have to be willing to wanting to train and push yourself as the same way that you are willing to breathe every day.
Wow.
So that was a kind of a saying in my head when it became really tough. It said, this is going to be really hard. This interval training or whatever you do, or physical training, it's going to be hard. But if you have the right mindset, then you just know that it's just something you have to do to become the best.
Mm-hmm. And you've noticed that you have been like this since you were a child. You were a little kid, this attitude, like being tough mentally.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, everyone have a story behind. I never became a world champion. I became a European champion. I was fourth in the world. I did many, many incredible results that started out to be a dream, and then they became a goal, and then they became something that I achieved because of the hard work. But I think
my question is about: do you think it's something that you are born with, this attitude of a champion, or is something that you build in time?
I definitely think it's something that I was kind of a little bit of a born with. I maybe had a little bit different mindset than most people, because I realized when I was a kid also, I find it really difficult to lose in something. I was not good at playing football. I was not good at things with a ball, and it really frustrated me. And I always went home and I did some more training to become better at what I was at that sport. So I guess it's just a little bit mentally that I had a little bit different mindset. And for me, it was a game changer as well when unfortunately I lost my dad when I was 16 years old. to brain cancer. And from that point and onwards, there was something in me that really turned me on regarding wanting to achieve what my dad and what I have told my dad at that time before he died, that I wanted to be, a world champion, and I wanted to do world championship. And everything from he passed away when I was 16, I basically become like from a child to a man in a very short period of time. And I remember thinking of all those things when I was getting older, and never quitting and never giving up. So I think my mentality was a winner mentality. I never gave up on something, and I was very determined to do what I have told myself or told other people and fulfill it. And then a different motivation came when I lost my dad, and I could see that I could go two ways. Either I could stop the sport that I loved and we build up together, or I could go full in and try to get the best out of it.
I know that if I remember correctly, you didn't have a coach. Is it right?
Yeah, I never actually been trained. I had many good advices from people, but I have never actually been coached on the motocross bike, which today is, I think people would probably say that it's almost impossible. At my time, I didn't feel there was anyone that could coach me in a way that I needed that time. I kind of felt that I had to learning by doing. And because I was the first one to ever become a professional motocross athlete, I also felt probably there was nobody that could really give me advice how to become, a world champion. I kind of felt that I had to go through this battle, and I had to learn it by doing. And you can say I was maybe a little bit skilled with some natural capabilities or talent. I don't know. Or maybe it's just because I was so interested in the sport that I learned very, very quickly, and I was willing to learn.
Is there anything that your dad teach you, or he was giving you advices? How did he help you?
No, the only thing that he could help me with, and was, of course, because the sport is quite demanding and expensive. I think my dad was working very hard to be able to keep my hobby alive and dream alive. But what I'm actually taking a lot from him is that he always kept me, working with the bike, doing all the cleaning. It was not like I could go riding and then I will come home and then I could just sit on my room and like some people do today. The kids go and play on the computer and they do other things. I was always in the garage, helping him, preparing the bike, so I know everything about the material side of it. So he was very, and that came to advanced. When he passed away, I could basically do the motocross bike, and I did that since I was 5 years old, helping him with washing and doing everything on my own. And I kind of admire him for that, because I, sometimes when you're a kid, you're washing a little bit and you think, let me just do it and then we get this job done. But he kept me, trying to learn and improve of how to wash the bike and how to maintain the bike. But when it came to advice with the motocross bike, he never rode a bike before. He rode just a street bike. And he never gave me advice. That I remember just a couple of things that he always said to me when I go out, was just to go out and have some fun. And that's what I did. The motivation to win came always just on my own. When the gate dropped, I just wanted to win. That was my main target. I didn't like to become second. I don't like to become third, and I don't like to just be in the sport just to fool around. I had a willing to go out and do my absolute best, and hopefully that was good enough to win.
And right now you are a coach. You are a Yamaha coach as well. And I'm wondering how do you help the kids right now? Do you stay very involved? Do you give a lot of advices, or you just let them go and practice and having fun? How do you proceed?
No, I think it's definitely a massive combination. Like I try to keep myself on the way that I learned how to ride a motorcycle. But of course, today, when the bikes are faster, when you have better suspension, when it's a lot more required of the riders already from a young age, we need to train the technique. We need to get the right things, and learning by doing today with higher speed, with bigger jumps, have just bigger consequences. So for me, it's also important to tell them that, okay, you need to stand like this, you need to act like this, you need to be in good shape, and you need to do this, because if you don't do that, the sport can be quite dangerous. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to explain to the kids, what to do and how to do this better. I've been involved with the sport for 41 years. I've seen a lot of things. I tried a lot of things. I learned a lot of things. And it's important for me to give that on to the young riders and help them perform at their highest level, but also to keep it fun and not be there that you do bad or you do this and you do that, but actually come and do constructively critique. If you're doing something not so good, you're asking them, well, you can also do like this. And I'm so lucky that I'm still able to ride a motorcycle in a very good way. So I'm also able to show it to other people and to my students that wants to learn from me.
Is there anything that you search, because you are working with many kids, are there some personality traits, skills that you are looking for some kids in order to become champions, and then invest the time in them?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely look. I think a lot of things with the sport and probably with anything that we do in life, it's honesty. If you're always blaming other people for your lack of success, I think you will never achieve anything in the sport of motocross, but I think also in general in life. So what the sport have taught me a lot is not only to be dedicated, it's not only to find a motivation because of the interest, but it's also learned me how to be honest with myself, that I cannot keep pointing at other people, because there is always three fingers that is pointing at myself, and I need to improve myself and my way of looking at my training, how to eat, how to sleep, how to set up my bike. And that's the kind of honesty that I'm looking for in a rider. Is like, first of all, you got to be willing to sacrifice something. You cannot become a champion without putting more hours or putting more dedication or be more professional than your competitors. And second of all, you got to be very, very honest with yourself, that you cannot blame people from not having success if you have not looked inside. And the third most important thing is actually be able to not to be afraid and be able to fail, and don't be afraid of failing, because if you keep being aware that you are afraid of failing and you don't want to fail because you want to prove to everyone that you could be the best, then you will never succeed, because how are you going to find your limits if you are afraid of failing? And like, what is other people thinking? You have to be a little bit arrogant. You have to believe in yourself. And most of all, I think you have to be willing to sacrifice.
And if you see a rider that he doesn't make these sacrifices, do you tell them, do they correct themselves? Yeah, I mean, that's the problem also being me, is that I'm a very honest guy, because I had to, this is a very lonely sport, and there's only a few that becomes, can call themselves winning races or become one of the best in the world of doing what we do. So I'm actually very much aware of,
if you want to come to me and you want to be trained by me and you want to become, somebody or a champion or whatever, I'm also going to tell you straight up what you need to do to be so, And if they don't want to do that, maybe we should evaluate the situation and said, everyone wants to become a champion on Instagram and showing how much work they do, with picture on the bicycles. But are you really willing to sacrifice when it becomes really tough? Do you have the capability of doing that, And there you can say, I'm very honest, if you are not willing to go and do hard training and almost throwing up and vomiting because it's so tough, then maybe we should evaluate the goals.
But this discussion is at what age? We are talking about small kids, big kids?
No, you know what? I think it's a very fine line because my own son is 10 years old and he loves motocross, but he also plays football. And I think for him and for other kids, I really try to put a lot of fun into it and make sure that they're just having a good time, trying to work a little bit on their technique. But when they get to depending on their goals, but when they get to 12, 13, when they go into this puberty, I think that's where you have to keep them a little bit and trying to refer on the goals that you want to make either together, because I think very often the dad have probably bigger goals than actually the son, where in my childhood, it was probably me that had a lot more goals than my dad had. He just wanted me to go out and have fun and do some fun things. But I wanted to win, and I would do anything to be able to do that. So I think it starts a little. I think if you can keep it as fun as long as possible, and you can just say maybe go running maybe 1 or 2 times a week, or go running with them, or do some other sports that also bring some fun in, like football or whatever that could be, just to be able to teach them other things as well. Like I said, my son is riding motocross, which is very independent on yourself. But I think it's also important that he maybe do other sports where he have to be a team player, because our sport is a very defined line of you have to speak and communicate with the team. But when you sit behind that gate and there's 39 other riders on the line, you have to be closer to yourself and how you're going to get to that first corner, the first, And when you do World Championship on that high level, the other people that's sitting next to you have also put a lot of hours. They also train 1,440 hours a year or more to sit here and believe that they can win a World Championship. So you have to do a little bit more, but if you can keep it as fun as possible, as long as possible, and try to make them train, but still where they don't actually feel they're training. When you do physical, that could be badminton, that could be football, it could be other things. I think that's very important, because when you become a professional, I mean, we are talking. Everyone wants to win. And everyone wants to be the best, but we are talking about a very, very small percentage that will actually become a world champion. So what it takes is that when you get to that level, you need to understand that everything that you do from the morning to the midday to the evening is about sleeping, is what you eat, is about everything comes down to the smallest detail. And that's where it can become tough,
Talking about the small details, what is the difference between the person who has the first place and the one who has the 5th or the 10th place?
Well, I definitely think that's I think there's a fine line. You can become from 50, let's say from 7 to 15. I see that as a little bit the same level. And then you have from 3 to 7. And then you have from 3 to be a world champion. It's about looking at yourself and the team and the bike, trying to find those small details that will make the ride more comfortable for you when we're talking about setup on the bike. But also, again, finding the best performance and surrounding your people that also believe that you can become a world champion. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the reasons why I moved, to Italy, to other places in the world, because I was surrounded by people that understood my goals and wanted to be, winning a world championship together with me. When you become a factory rider, I mean, it's not about being second or third or fourth. It's about winning a world championship for me and the team. So when you surround with people with same goals, it becomes more clear that we have to work very much in a very, very professional way. And that's where you're going to look at yourself, how you sleep, how you eat, how you recuperate, how you train, everything what you do around is that last bit that could be the difference between, winning or losing. And also, when I was racing, we did 16 rounds of the World Championship. It's 32 races a year. And to be performing on every surface like sand, hard, rock hard, track many stones, you have to be very consistent. And that's where the mindset plays in as well, that everything what you do, you have to be so perfect. It's about getting all the small details down to the finest thing as possible, and then do it consistently every single day. And that's where the routines of waking up, training, what you eat becomes an important thing of becoming a professional athlete.
So we don't talk about luck. We only talk about a lot of hard work and watching all the small details.
When the funny thing is, I was the first one to ever win a Grand Prix of being a Danish. I was the first one ever to be fourth in the world being Danish. I was the first one ever to sign a professional contract. And when I go out and do speeches in clubs or other people, I think people would most likely me to just be very lucky. It's difficult for people to understand how I could do it and nobody else could do it at that time. And I just said, you know what, guys, I am not special. I'm exactly like you. The only difference that separates me from being you is that I'm willing to put hard work in. And I'm willing to do everything what it takes to become a champion. But it's not because I'm special. It's just because I have a different mindset. And I look positive in things. I always look at the glass half full instead of being half empty. And I think that's one important thing. And that, I don't know if you can call that's a gift or that's how I'm brought up, with a positive family attitude, that we don't think about being unlucky. We make our own luck through hard work.
There are very powerful things that you told us. I love everything that you are saying. But coming back to the families, I'm wondering if you have some advices to the parents, because you know that the parents tend to be very, very involved next to the child. Is there anything that you can tell them in order to help the kids?
Yeah, I mean, first, like I said, in a little bit through the speech, is first thing to understand with the same goal, what do we want to achieve here? I mean, what is our goal? And set goals that is realistic. I mean, if we want to become, in your case, Romanian champion, what will it take to be able to do that? Financially, but also how can we work towards that goal? Second of all, I think it's to understand from the kid and the dad also that, never put pressure on the kid of trying to be better than he is. It's okay to say to him, I didn't see you do your best today because I seen you on Wednesday when we were practicing or whatever, that you did a lot better than this. Why are we not performing on that level? But never yelling and never screaming, and always trying to treat, the kids with respect, and the other way around as well. But also being positive, when you have positive mindset and when you do everything with a smile, the kids will look at the sport with a smile. I've seen kids, I've trained, they come in after the race and they're crying, and I'm like standing there thinking, I've done motocross for 41 years of my life, on 13 years on the highest level. I have never cried. I could be sad because I didn't live up to my own expectation, but I have never cried on motocross unless I've crashed and had a lot of pain. But otherwise, I always have a positive thinking of my sport because that I've never been pressurized to do something that I didn't like to do. It came in my own, I was a child, I raced with my friends, then I became a professional. I was ready to take that role that now it's time to go. There's only one chance. The train is only coming here one time. So if you don't get on that train now and you realize that you have to work 4 to 6 hours every day, 360 days a year, you're not going to be able to be one of the best in the world because the other guys are willing to do that, to become a world champion. So have fun. Never put pressure on the kids. You can be there with a constructive mindset and a positive mindset, helping and analyzing how both parts can get the best performance out of a race weekend.
And when the kid is losing or during a game or during a race, how the parent should react? Because sometimes the parent is reacting, oh, you did a great job, okay, yeah, I'm sorry. But how is constructive to react?
Well, I can only take out from my own perspective and how I've seen and admired my dad and my family and my mother. How when I had a bad race, how that affected me personally because it was me that wanted to win. So if I didn't win, I perfectly understood when I came over the finish line and I see 1, 2, 3, 4 guys in front of me. I know that I didn't perform on the best level. So when I came in after the race, I didn't need a dad to tell me you did a bad race because I knew that I did a bad race. So what he did and what I do admire him for was that he raised me up and I said, I think, you didn't do as good as I think you can do, but let's do it better next race or next weekend or whatever that will be. And that's about the positive attitude that not every time you're going to be able when you are a kid because the hormones, everything, you're not being able to produce results every single time and you're not able to be 100% positive and have the best result out of you because there's a lot of things that's happening when you're a kid. When you get to a mature status, you have about the routines, you have a different quietness about who you are and what you want to become. And then it's a lot easier to get down to the goals. But when you are kids, it's so many things. So I think the parents can really help a lot with, not saying that, oh yeah, that was that guy that right in front of you, not to become the guy that's always unlucky. It's not like, yeah, you didn't win because you didn't have that pipe or you didn't win because, this guy, he was in front of you, But actually just getting down to it, why didn't you feel that you was actually performing at your highest level? Didn't you eat properly or were you tired because you were sitting and Snapchatting all night, till 12 o'clock? And, more like analyzing of why that the kid never performed today at the highest level. And be positive about it and speak about it and communicate. Most parents are just getting the van and they're like this, the kid is sad, the dad is sad, and now even the mother is also sad because they're driving 2 hours home from the race and nobody is speaking, so nobody is analyzing. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, they're also really sad and pissed off, where I was like, I had a rule to myself when I was a kid, but also when I came a professional that, when I drive home in the evening with my dad or with my mom, we kind of analyzed how was this a good day and what could we do better? And that was the same when I raced. I analyzed a lot. I could sit and drive, for 10 hours in my camper on the way home to a race. I was not even tired because I kept thinking of why didn't I get the best results out of this weekend, But when I got out of the bed Monday morning, I was working towards the next goal and never hanging on to the negative, what happens the weekend before, or the day before. And also in the other way, when you win races, you're also going to be said, okay, I'm really happy. I celebrated yesterday with my team or whatever. But today, now it's work time. Now it's towards the next goal, and that's next weekend where we have to do it again.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, a lot. I have some advices now to use it with my son. Coming back to your son, I'm curious, how does sport influence his overall attitude towards life?
Yeah, like I spoke a little bit about before, like that's one of the things that one thing is that I don't speak like to a lot of people or my friends and new people that I meet who I was and how, all the great things that I could do on a motorcycle, because I think it's more like me in a person, who I am, that's more important for me now than all the results and everything what I have achieved of all the trophies. But I do remember how I got to that point and what the sport have learned me. And I think that's one of the most, sports that will teach people the most, and also including my own son. First of all, being dedicated, being able to focus on something, because when you sit on a motocross bike, you cannot have your thoughts, everywhere else, like, oh, well, what about my Instagram? What about this? You have to be so focused. And I hear that from people that also have big businesses that do motocross for fun, not to become a world champion. They said the only way that I can relax is when I go on a motocross bike and I put my helmet on and turn the motorcycle. I know there's the consequences of this sport. So that's why I really focus and I go around with a smile, because nobody can communicate with me. I don't have to think about anything else, bills, employees or anything else. I can just go to that next corner and I can have fun on that jump. And whatever my level is, I can have fun with the sport. And that's why I, relaxed and really, appreciate life. And I think that's the same with the kids. They really, have to be so focused. Everything what you do. If I go on the street bike, I will have earphones in my head. I will listen to good music or techno music or AC/DC or something that motivates me. But when I go on the motocross bike, I have to be so quiet. Everything, my mind have to be 100% focused. So when I get on a bike, before I go out to any practice, to any race, I make sure that I spend at least 2 or 3 minutes on my own, coming down, remind myself how dangerous this sport can be, and get down to a level so I get into what we call the zone. And when you are in that zone, I know that I'm 100% working. So when I have a little bit stress in life, or the kids have been, whatever bad, or whatever we all come in normal life, and you go out on the track, I put my bike out, I put my gear on. But when I sit on the bike and tighten this helmet strap, I just spent like a couple of minutes just on my own, or even just a couple of seconds, and said, okay, get into your zone, because when you get out there, then it can be high consequences. So that's my little thing, I'm always 100% focused. And I think that's what the kids also learn from this sport, is like, first of all, having great friendship with other people. And I probably only understood that now when I have my own son and see that go out riding, and what motocross can also be, because I forgot that when I was a professional, because it was about winning, and it was about winning, and it was about winning, and I just had to put the hours in. So I could maybe also say I forgot a little bit about the fun in the meantime that I was working towards the goal. But when I have my own son now and I do training schools, I don't want to be too hard either, because, when you're working with kids, the most important thing is that they have fun, and when they have fun, they're completely open-minded to listen and to learn. And that's why you have the attention. When you stand there and you say, oh, you're shit and you don't do this, the whole, system just breaks down, and everything what you say, it just go straight past their ear. They will start looking at the birds and everything else. So, but when you're positive minded and you get the attention of the kids, and you can do that through fun and do very, very short and correct speeches, that's where you have the attention of the kids, and that's where to be able to learn.
Thank you very much, Brian. It is the end of our discussion, and I really, really hope that all the inspirational words will touch the heart of the parents and of the kids. Thank you very much. Vă mulțumesc și vouă tuturor celor care ne-ați urmărit astăzi. Vă invit să descoperiți și noul număr al revistei Psihologii pe curând.